Yes, we are just opening the waiting room, so everybody's popping in. So give us a couple of minutes to let that happen, let this populate. Glad to see some familiar faces as well as, or familiar names, since many of you are not turning your cameras on, which is fine. But it's great to see some familiar names as well as I see a lot of new names, and that makes me really happy. It was kind of like to see who's got whose dog is with them in the background. We'll see how mine do. I always like to, this is one of the caveats I give at the beginning of any webinar, is that I have 3 dogs, one of whom is in here right now. And if an Amazon delivery or a group of children on summer vacation go past my house, there will suddenly be a volley of barks, and I'll try to hit mute as quickly as I can.
Ditto that. I have 2, so same thing. Anybody comes, we'll hear them.
Okay. Yeah,
I'll throw a teenager at home into the mix, so we can all people and humans and canines.
We all have distractions somewhere in the background, right?
Absolutely.
One of my favorite stories to share again while we're letting the room populate is during the pandemic, during the lockdown year, I was working at the Birmingham Zoo, and I was at home, and we had the zoo conference that year was given virtually, and I was a speaker at the conference. So I gave this speech. I was very proud of my presentation. I thought it went really well, and I had reached a point in it that was intended to be very moving, kind of emotional and moving for the audience. At that moment, the cat had the biggest hairball that you have ever heard a cat cough up, and there's nothing you can do. I just had to sit there and plow ahead with this horrible noise behind me. It was a classic. People still talk about it to this day. It's awful. Let me see, we've got, looks like about 52 or so people in. Liza, do you think I should get started for the interest of time, or?
I think that's great.
Okay, we'll plow ahead, and we know that people will continue to pop in, and that's great. So yeah, so thank you all again so much. Familiar faces, familiar names, and new ones. I'm so happy to have you all joining us here today. We are this webinar is about inclusive hiring practices and hiring for diversity in cultural organizations. We have 3 really just incredibly amazing and impressive HR leaders joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to share just a couple of quick thoughts. I'll try to let you hear very little from me and more from them. But for the first thing I wanted to share is why this webinar series is called the Understory. And it is part of our analogy about what our company is called Canopy. And when people think about a forest or a forest canopy, they tend to focus on that top level, thinking about that. But that's not all that makes up a forest, right? The understory is where the plant and animal life and communities can begin to dominate the forest landscape and shelter and impact that ecosystem. And so we kind of just dug the name, and we kind of dug what it means. So that's why we're calling it that. And just quickly, the context for this webinar, many of you know that in 2022 and 2023, Canopy, with some partners, led a research study to look at barriers to women and people of color in entering and in advancing in cultural organizations. And it was an incredibly valuable study. We are still still reverberating from the implications of it. But the key piece for us is not to just think about the barriers, but think about solutions, right? We don't want to just think about here's all the things that are wrong. We want to think about the things that are right and the things that we can do differently. And that is why I am thrilled to introduce to you our three panelists today. I'll ask them to introduce themselves, but I'll just say we have LaToria Barham, the Director of Human Resources from Ginter Botanical Garden. We have Lisa Ruth, who is the VP of People and Culture at the Museum of Life and Science. And we have Sasha Diskin, who is an HR executive and a transformation leader. And I love that title, and she really is. So let me ask our panelists to say hello, introduce themselves, and then we will get started. LaToria, would you like to start us off?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. LaToria Barham, the Director of Human Resources for Ginter Botanical Garden. I am responsible for leading Ginter Botanical Garden's human resource strategy, the overall strategy for the entire organization. Transitioned here about 2 years ago from Seattle, one of the first HR representatives in the history of the organization. So I'm super excited, super proud, and honored to be here and join you guys today to share our HR strategies and tips on how we can move forward and evolve our organizations.
Great, thank you, LaToria. Just going in order of the windows on my screen, Lisa?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Ruth. I am, as Lori said, the VP for People and Culture at the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina. And I've been at the museum for about 2 years. And similar to LaToria, I'm the first VP for People and Culture at the museum. The museum did a series of listening sessions, and one of the things that after the George Floyd murder, and one of the things that came out was a need to have someone not just someone half-time in finance and half-time in HR, but somebody full-time focused on the people and culture of the organization. And my background is actually in libraries, so a different type of cultural institution. So some of what I'm going to talk about is what we're doing at the museum, but also some of the things that I've had success with in the world of libraries as well. So thank you all for having me. Like LaToria, I'm honored to be here with you.
Thank you, Lisa. That's fantastic. Libraries are one of my comfort places. I love knowing that. Sasha.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be here today. I'm Sasha Diskin. I have more than 20 years of experience in human resources. I actually come to you from a different industry. Most recently, I was the Vice President of Talent, Diversity, and Inclusion at Horizon Therapeutics, which is a biotechnology pharmaceutical company. I was there for more than 6 years, leading areas of talent management, talent acquisition, people analytics, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. For those who may not be familiar, I assume many may not be, Horizon was one of the fastest growing companies, in particular in biotechnology companies over the last several years. While I was there during my tenure, we tripled in size, mostly through organic growth from 850 to 2,200 people, from 500 million revenue to 3 billion. And at the end of last year, we were acquired by Amgen, a 25,000 person pharmaceutical company with a global footprint in 100 countries. So it was really fantastic to contribute to Horizon's growth. And during my tenure, we made great strides in areas of DEI that I look forward to sharing with you today, in the areas of attraction and development, and hope that I can share some of the best practices that will also resonate with all of you as well. And I look forward to learning from LaToria and Lisa as well. So thank you for having me.
See, did I tell you? Awesome panelists, right? Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. So the way that we were talking about this internally, thinking about how to approach this this topic. It's a big topic, but we thought maybe it sort of naturally lends itself to 3 areas. One is, how do you attract diverse talent to even come and knock on your door, to apply to work at your organization? How do you then have an inclusive process the hiring process? How do we make sure that those people who are knocking on the door can feel included in that process? And then number 3, how do you retain them? That's after you get making people feel welcome and feeling a sense of belonging. So maybe starting from the attraction part, can any of you share with us? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to. I always do this. Participants, webinar participants, please raise your hand, put something in the chat. We want this to be an interactive session, so please feel free to offer questions, follow-ups, whatever contribution you'd like to make, either through raising your hand or the chat. So let me start with tips for attracting. How do we bring new faces into cultural organizations?
Well, I'll step in and go first. I truly believe that it starts from the beginning of the job seeking process. And so it starts for me for those inclusive job descriptions. So being free from biased language, being very transparent about salary ranges, the working conditions of the particular position that you're applying for, and the organization as a whole. Absolutely fostering an inclusive culture by getting that feedback from your internal and your external stakeholders. Also local career connections. That's also a way that we here at Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden attracts that diverse candidates. We partnership with VCU's RRTC program. We partner with Virginia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. There's different types of partnerships that we have here local that kind of helps us with those job postings, those jobs boards, and that networking opportunity.
I'll add to that. I totally agree with all of that. One of the things that we had a lot of success with when I was in libraries was including really explicit statements in our job ad about our values. And that's not just the big, the landing page. That's even in the little blurb that goes out onto the website so that folks know that we're putting our values front and center. And so that really changed a lot for us when we were able to do that and have on the landing page more information about actual programs, actual successes that we were having. We got a lot of positive feedback that was very attractive. The other thing is that you don't wait for people to knock on your door, you go knock on their door. And so doing a lot of, as LaToria was saying, like outreach into the community, outreach to different schools, thinking about who your community partners are and how to leverage those connections.
And I actually agree. Everything that was just said by Lisa and LaToria, I agree with and is applicable, I think, across industries. I would maybe just add, we had at Horizon, we actually took a step back and really tried to understand the labor markets with respect to the roles that we were looking at. And that was really helpful because we were talking a lot about attracting diverse candidates, but we really didn't know what is the talent pool composition that we need or want. And what might sound good or bad may not be good or bad when you look at the realities of the labor market in the geography that you are trying to attract talent. So I think data in that regard is really critical. And then the additional thing that we actually started to do was to say, well, if the labor market doesn't represent the diversity of talent that we want it to, what can we do as an organization to help in the development of that talent? So thinking a bit futuristically, can you promote different kinds of roles and opportunities, even at the high school level or in the colleges in your area, and get people interested in the industry and the roles in which you're trying to really drive change? So that was something that slightly esoteric and a bit futuristic, but something that was really meaningful and allowed people to really engage around the intentionality there as well.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, what all of you have said, and in particular, the questions about the labor pool. Mm-hmm. What we have heard from some organizations is, well, nobody applies. Nobody, I can only hire from who applies. And Lisa, you make a good point about my analogy about knocking on the door is kind of a passive one, right? How can we be more active in reaching out to different communities, and demonstrating? We keep hearing that people don't look at these at cultural organizations, people of color, certainly, and other less well represented groups don't look at these organizations as a place where, oh, I could go have a career there, I could go have a job there. And I think that's a really critical piece. How do we make people understand, our guests that come in, understand, hey, I could work here, you know? Has anybody found any status quo challenging ways to reach those kinds of audiences?
We had really great luck this past year with a program at a school called Cristo Rey, and I believe that they exist all over the country. And it's an internship program for high school students from underrepresented groups. And we, at first I was like, this sounds great. How much work is it going to be? And I don't want to support an unpaid internship. And it turned out that they actually do get paid, and it was very rewarding work, I will say. It wasn't, no extra work. It's always extra work to have interns, but I think that's a good place to put your energy, to look for those kinds of programs, and to always make sure that you're paying people. I would say another thing that we do is when we have, for instance, our Black Excellence in Science event, we always include one of our staff members, at least one of our staff members, on the panel, so that people see, oh, like, it's not just people at the front desk. Like, there's a whole group of scientists and professionals who are behind the scenes, who you don't necessarily see, but we try and put them front and center. We've put posters of them all over the museum as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great, it begins to sound sort of trite, but you can't overestimate the value of role models, of people seeing other people. I like the poster idea. When I was at the Birmingham Zoo, one of the things that we did in one of the buildings was there were posters featuring the faces of staff all across the board. It wasn't focused particularly on racial or ethnic minorities, or gender minorities, but just, it was an opportunity for people. Hey, look at, wow, that person went to Brazil and studied jaguars. Wow, how, and just that sort of thing. Another thing that I've heard is, can we find opportunities for people to see that working in a garden isn't just about planting plants, or working in a museum isn't just about curating exhibits. You can be a marketer, you can be an accountant, you can be an HR professional. There are lots of different roles, and you can work at a place that has a mission that might matter to you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. What about the hiring process itself? So if we can find ways to actively reach out to newer communities, different communities, to let them know that we are here and that we have roles, we have jobs, we have careers that can be offered. What can we do in the hiring process to make ourselves more accessible and more inclusive?
I'm happy to start with this one because this was something that we really, I wouldn't say struggled with, but really wanted to overcome kind of our status quo in this regard. And there were a couple of things that we did. Once we looked at the hiring process, we really wanted to mitigate bias. And I think that's where you're kind of also going with your question, Lori. And this sounds kind of simple, but the two things that actually really started working for us was really making sure that all of the interviewers were sticking to objective criteria. So I don't know about all of you, but I've often found myself in conversations relating to candidates about the college we went to, or maybe our children's ages or our pets. And so while that's great, it does create connections that are not really related to kind of the professional environment or, from that perspective. So really making sure that everyone's using objective criteria in their assessment of candidates and really trying to get the noise out of the system from that perspective. And then the other thing is panel interviews. So when we found that it's much more efficient and effective, but it also, again, mitigates bias because you have multiple people hearing the same thing and at the same time, and it creates for much more compelling dialogue in assessing the candidate's true competencies, skills, experiences in relation to the role. And so those are just two levers that we pulled that I think really were helping us on our journey to mitigate bias in the hiring process.
And I will jump in and piggyback off of that. Very much the same for the garden. I would just add on, being a little bit more transparent, excuse me, being a little bit more transparent, being transparent about our culture, and going back to the panel, when we speak about inclusion and diversity, we have a diverse panel that when we're having those panel interviews, all walks of life are involved in those in the interview process, so that they get to see that someone that looks like them, is working for this organization. Also share those professional development opportunities. There are so many opportunities. I myself knew nothing about horticulture when I was hired for the garden. I do not have a green thumb at all. However, I learned that there are so many other opportunities here, so many different positions, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of institutional knowledge, that is just not surrounded by horticulture. There's other professions that we have here in the organization as well. Also, I think it's very important for those job-related videos, simulations, so that you can really give that realistic preview of what that position entails.
Absolutely.
And I'll just add, piggybacking on what Sasha was saying about focusing on objective criteria, I think it's really important to have an evaluation form at the end for those panelists, because you don't want to just have a panel and then not collect the right data from them. So to have a form that is focused on not on the job duties, but on the actual qualifications, because you want to be focused on qualifications, not on can somebody walk in and do the job tomorrow. Like, nothing pisses me off more than like hit the ground running. A couple of other things that we did with great success in libraries that I've had trouble with at the museum actually is inserting HR in the process a little bit more. And keeping an eye on all of the balls that are going on, because so often hiring managers just get focused on faster, faster, faster. And sure, I want to hire fast as well, but I want to hire right. And so to sort of insert yourself into that process. And then on panel interviews, one of the things that we did is that we included a member of our diversity committee in the panel interviews. And again, that was signaling to candidates how important this was. And it also, that person was sort of briefed on all of our activities and programs around diversity. And so they could really speak to it, because I'm in North Carolina. We had candidates who were asking really challenging questions about Confederate monuments and bathroom bills. And so we needed to have somebody in the room who could answer those questions. And then one other thing that I found really helpful was to be transparent about what we expected in applicants. I hear, and I'm still struggling with this at the museum, I hear so many folks say, well, they didn't include a cover letter, so I'm not even going to consider them. I'm like, how do they know that a cover letter is expected? That's a real cultural norm that not everyone is aware of. And so if you want a cover letter, say you want a cover letter. If you want it to address certain things, say that in the job ad. And that way, if they don't do those things, it's because they didn't follow directions, not because they just didn't know.
Yeah, it seems so simple, right? But it's like, well, how do you hold someone to an expectation that you didn't share? Yeah. I think that's, it's a simple but really powerful observation. I wanted to follow up on something that I think it was Sasha who said, we connect with candidates when, oh, you have a Dalmatian, I have a Dalmatian. Oh, you're a runner, I'm a runner. And those are great. It's good to have those personable conversations with candidates, but it's so important. That's an unconscious bias towards people, right? As opposed to being an unconscious bias against them. So I think that score sheet that you're talking about is really, really important. And that has to be what you go on, right? It's like, well, this one scored lower, but they seem so much like me. I just want, we have to make sure that we get rid of those kind of biases. So I think that's a really important observation. I
actually have a
Sorry.
question from the chat that kind of ties into that, Lori. So how do you get hiring managers on board with new and different ways to interview or questions to ask?
It's the magic question, isn't it? Yeah, in my experience, that is the biggest challenge. And I think one of the things that helped me in libraries was to have a kickoff meeting and to really talk about what the priorities are. And it sort of helps to refocus. Now, having the kickoff meeting in and of itself is a change that's hard to get people on board with. But I think it helps to sort of set the tone, refocus things on where you want it to be.
Speaking for Louis Ginter, I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
No, go ahead, LaToria.
Speaking for Louis Ginter, what I drive to empower, right? And so we want to empower those managers, those supervisors to collaborate and provide that feedback and that input so we can together as a group and a team determine what that looks like, what that process looks like. And so most of the time I allow our supervisors and managers to drive, and then I jump in with feedback, giving them, HR language and strategies to use to move forward to push those positions. And so I'm really a big I'm a big advocate on empowerment for all staff, not just supervisors and managers, but definitely for this process, empowering them because they're the individuals that are going to be working with these new hires. We, as the HR managers and leaders and professionals of the organizations, we are not working day to day with these individuals. We're not setting those internal expectations for the departments and the teams. And so it's very important that we allow them to have some or most of the control in that process.
Yeah, I would also add that I think it's a great question, right? And because I think everyone's alluding to the challenges of our managers and getting on board. I would actually offer up something that's worked really well for me, I think, in my career, is actually thinking of managers as a group and kind of I think the word transparent communication has come up a couple of times now. But one of the things that I have found works really well is to explain to managers, to leaders, not in that order, to your leaders, then to managers, what your objective and strategy is to begin with as an organization. So I assume, I see LaToria nodding, but if the organization knows that there's an enterprise level mandate to improve, to attract more diverse talent, for example, and why, and then what is your role as a manager in participating in that process? And therefore, when you are hiring, there's going to be some new process requirements that maybe you haven't done in the past. And here's why we find that this is going to help us. And we're going to tell you what the results are over time. And I think this is just one example. I think you can overlay many a change in this regard. But if you can include managers in the overall understanding of why you're doing certain things, why it's important, what the outcomes are along the way, and their role and contributions, I found that is just really not a slam dunk, but it definitely gets you down the court. I don't know if I'm using that analogy properly, but I will say it's a really big win in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's having come up through the ranks in a cultural organization in a zoo, I know that I got into a habit of, I had a set of interview questions. If I'm hiring a curator, this is what let me go find the latest dated version of my interview questions, and roll them out again. And I know I'm not different from so many people in other cultural organizations. You have a million things to do. You're just trying to get through this. I'm just going to hire the first person who ticks as many boxes as possible. So I think that what you're saying is that, and what I'm hearing and what I think is really important is we have to take a step back and consciously change the process, right? Sit down with managers, and it is what you were just saying, Sasha, explain to them, here's the institution's goal is to increase the diversity, racial, ethnic, social, gender, whatever it might be, of our workforce. And here's why. We often fail to say why. We just say, here's what we're doing. And here's how we want you to help us do that. Here's your role in doing that. And I think that that would do so much to help get hiring managers on board and on the right page, and moving forward. I think that's just brilliant. Any
I
other?
would add one more thing, Lori.
Yes.
This year we had a leadership retreat, and the theme was we were talking about different generations in the workforce. And so I think that also plays a huge part, as we are working with the managers and supervisors. We have to kind of curtail, right, exactly what that process looks like. And so I've been fascinated with the information that we received back in January, because I'm more old school than anything. And so that really taught us a lot, because you've got to kind of meet folks where they are. And so I think that understanding the different generations in the workplace also would help tremendously as we collaborate and understand and work together as we move forward those strategies.
Yes. Yes.
Great point.
We could do a whole webinar on that all by itself. Oh my goodness.
I think
Comes up every day.
And maybe we will, because that's one where I am, I'm probably one of the older people on this webinar, but I'm so tired of hearing that these kids today don't want to work hard. These kids today don't want to, their expectations are, that's not true. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by sort of dissing the kids that are coming up. This is the future. If we don't have them, we have nothing. So I think that's on the list, Liza, for a future webinar for us. Yes.
I was going to say there's a +1 in the chat. Would love that webinar.
Okay. All right. Good deal. We will work on that.
Topic.
I'm also very interested in, well, before I do that, anyone else in the group who's joined us here today have any questions you want to call out? Any comments or feedback?
I don't know if they want to share on camera. If so, please feel free to jump on. But there were some really great suggestions in the chat, especially about attracting diversity. I loved this one, that they identified 20+ diverse groups in the community. And then whenever they have a new role, they send it out to them first for a week of early access. So specifically community organizations that fall under the DEAI umbrella, which is awesome. And then there are actually 2 people who commented that they have Cristo Rey. They've been working with Cristo Rey students. One of them, Claire, says they have them the whole school year, and often year to year, the same students will return. So that's great for skill building and relationship building. And then Tony says, we identified zip codes in the surrounding area that represent the community, partnered with the city through the Denver Youth Employment Program. And they pay for 120 hours of work for the youth. Awesome. So some great suggestions. Yeah. It's great to hear people are involved in the communities.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you, Liza. Hi, everyone. My name is Tony. I work at Denver Zoo as the HR manager. So just a part of that program, which has been really incredible for us. And something that we're working through right now is how do we continue to engage the youth that are in that program to build that pipeline. And we talked about it a lot in this chat already, but how do we build that foundation so that they understand that there is a place for them here, and even if it's not in animal care or something else, but if they go on to go to college or something like that, and then they come back to us, wouldn't that be an incredible opportunity for us to engage with them? But it's been challenging, I would say, to understand and have a foundation in place that does that for them. But it has been an amazing opportunity for us in Denver.
Yeah, I think the relationship building piece of it is really important. And someone, Jessica just put in the chat, I think, a really critical question, which is how do you maintain connections to these community partners in between position postings? Because this shouldn't just be a transactional relationship, right? This shouldn't just be, hey, you folks over there, I got a position. Want to offer me some candidates? Although I have to say, I love the idea of the early access for the diverse groups. That's brilliant. But how do you maintain those relationships with these groups in between postings?
I can actually share something that worked for us, and it was kind of new just a couple years ago. But what we started to do was to engage. I don't know if Horizon's bigger than a lot of the organizations that we have joining us today, but employee resource groups, or we had people where you could overlay just people who are interested in this mission that we're talking about. And we actually identified somebody their day job was their day job, but they would act as the liaison to an organization like what is being described, Lori, and we would ask them to just keep the communications, let people know when there might be a community event that Horizon was participating in, and actually in between postings, as you're talking about, really ensure that we have someone from the company just engaged in that organization from like a week to week, month to month. And that was something that we started to find good traction, because when we did have an opportunity, it wasn't new, and they were keeping tabs of what was happening at Horizon as well. So I love the question. I think it is challenging, but I think anything that's grassroots in that regard feels like it could really work potentially.
Yeah, and it demonstrates sincerity, right? It demonstrates that this isn't something the organization is doing, again, sort of to check a box. This is a long-term strategy for the continued growth and development and survival of these cultural organizations. We are reliant on new people joining our workforces. So sorry, I'm trying to read there's such good stuff going on in the chat as well as back and forth. I'm going to let Liza handle the chat. I am going to ask about, so if we engage a number of these really incredible strategies, and we're able to hire some new people, new faces, new backgrounds into our organizations, how do we help these people feel that they actually have a place, that they belong, that they're not there because we wanted to say, oh, look, I've got a Muslim working for me. We want there to be a real sense of belonging within these communities. How do we do that once we've got them on board?
I would start out speaking for Louis Ginter is it starts from onboarding and new hire orientation, continuing to stay engaged, scheduling that 1 week, 1 month check-in, a buddy system, having a buddy system from the team that can convey the mission of our organization, be that clear point of contact. That way we don't have to bury down managers and supervisors and leaders of the organization. And also that's a part of professional development for the mentor. I think that giving them a win right away, doing the initial hire once they on board, something very simple, nothing really difficult, doesn't really require a skill set. It's just more of maybe inviting them in on a brainstorming session, something that makes them feel like they're already valued when they initially start their jobs.
Yeah, I love all the buddy system is a great idea, right? because it's scary. Let's face it, when you start at a new place, especially if you are representative of an underrepresented group, it's even more scary to start at a new place. And I love the idea that the quick win idea. Hey, come sit in, because what's the big secret? Come sit in on this brainstorming session. We'd love to let you know how we operate as a team, and let you hear how we approach problems or approach new initiatives that we might be focused on. So yeah, I think that's.
I think for us, oh, go ahead. I was just going to say some of the things that have been helpful for us, and I feel like retention is always the hardest part. And so I think not being silent as an organization. I was working in libraries when we were struggling with Confederate monument and when George Floyd was murdered, and all of these things were happening. And I think we weren't silent. We said, as we were a state institution, so we couldn't say as much as we wanted, but we didn't stay silent. And so I think that we heard back from staff that was important. We had affinity groups where folks could come together. I will say that I don't think that my present organization is ready for affinity groups. Like, I think you have to be ready for that, but it was hugely beneficial at my last organization to have those affinity groups. Yeah, I think those are some of the other things that we've tried.
Yeah, I would just build on kind of just double click and acknowledge that quick win with onboarding and the affinity groups where they're appropriate. I think that's a great point, Lisa. The other thing I would just add is that the stickiness and retention for anyone, whether they identify as a member of an underrepresented group or not, is development. And going back to the question about managers and getting your managers on board, I found that when you set expectations for managers, that part of their role is developing their teams and ensuring that team members have a sense as to what are the skills that they should be building, what are the experiences that they should have, what are the things that are going to really engage and drive them to stay, even if it's not for a role that you have in your current organization, but that they know their manager has their back, their manager supporting their growth and development is in and of itself a really great retention lever. And I would also add through education, where I mentioned that we've talked to all of our managers about the organizational approach and strategy and priority around diverse hiring as an example. We also educated about bias and about sharing statistics and research around feedback, for example, that people tend to go light on feedback for people who are in underrepresented groups. Even if the person giving the feedback is part of an underrepresented group or identifies as such. And just sharing data and research and being transparent and expectations for managers around development in particular. And for me, a lot of that's based on feedback and development plans is really one key tactic to drive retention in this regard that I think is really meaningful and important.
Yes, I want to applaud and emphasize all of that. That's hugely important.
Yeah, so many good ideas. And Randy, I am loving the stuff that you're putting in the chat. I love this idea of the questionnaire. For one, I need something to binge watch, so I'd love to get a questionnaire from all of you so I can know what to watch next. But I think that's such a great idea to get to know a person, right? Once they're on board, and maybe helping them find other people who share their interests and that sort of thing. We did a little bit of that when I was at Disney, just within our teams. Like for my team, I had a spreadsheet. I knew the favorite candy, I knew the favorite restaurant, I knew the birthday, all of those sorts of things, which just helps you, make that extra connection with somebody. So I think that's a great idea. It's again part of that manager training though, right? This is where those actions are going to come from, is that managerial level. So it's incumbent upon leadership to make sure that the managers understand, no, this is part of your job. This is not an extra, right? Yeah.
I just want to emphasize too, it's completely optional too, because you really want to reiterate some people are more private than others. So we always give them the option to fill us out and kind of explain why we're filling it out or why we're asking to help, people feel welcome and be more engaged while they're at work. But some people like to keep their private life private, and and that's definitely something that I stress and reiterate. It's definitely like proven on multiple occasions where I've had people come. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this person loved a bike ride. I love to bike ride. Like, I don't know anything about bike riding, but I'm ecstatic that they do and that they are connecting with each other about their love of bike riding.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Randy. And just to piggyback, I think it's very important that you're intentional about it, and intentional when you're meeting that individual halfway. You have some introverts, you have some extroverts, and so you got to kind of figure that out, right? Most recently, I used an example in one of our meetings, and I just gave an example of, how do you get to engage and learn more about your employee? And there may be an employee that's an introvert that comes in the mornings, and the only time that they talk or chatter is getting coffee, water cooler talk. And so that's that opportunity. If you're studying your staff, you'll know that the mornings, from 8 to 10 or whatever, would be that opportunity for you to actually engage and be intentional about the next steps with that employee or relationship management.
So other thoughts? I'd like to, we only have got about 13 minutes left. I would love to hear from our webinar participants. Any other questions?
I have one question I can read out, Lori.
Sure.
Ties back to the hiring process. Danny asks, has anyone hired on a resume only without conducting an interview?
Yeah, that feels really dangerous.
It does.
Especially right now with AI and all this stuff that you're hearing, especially in the IT world, about folks generating resumes that are not accurate. Lying on resumes isn't new, but it's easier now.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, that's so scary. Danny?
Yeah, no, I just heard about that recently, and it was with a government agency. So that's why I was just curious whether anybody has experienced that in the zoo and aquarium world or any of yours. And it was just like, I wondered the same thing. Like, oh my gosh, like with all the things that you all just mentioned, it's the possibility for what you're getting into. But I thought it was weird because it was actually the Army Corps of Engineers. So, yeah.
Oh,
thank you.
Yeah, that's that is either gutsy or maybe a little bananas. I'm not sure which which way that goes. I'm going to keep plowing ahead if there's no other feedback or comments from the group, or I guess maybe I'll ask our panelists, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you feel like is important to share, some important tips or guidance?
I would throw out one thing, Lori, that I had it in my notes, and it's this concept of what gets measured gets done. This is a really hard one, but I think if the organization is really placing a priority and value on moving the needle in some way in any of the contexts in which we're talking about today, I think that transparency of what is the expectation, what are the quick wins, and what does success look like, and explaining that, but also probably something at the very top of the house. I don't envision something that you would necessarily go too deep in the organization, but to have some accountability at play, I think is really important. Otherwise, there's so many organizational priorities. I'm sure everyone has on a day-to-day basis and a quarter-to-quarter basis, that I think accountability is a really important thing to think about. How are you embedding that into your process and strategy?
Yeah, I agree. Otherwise, again, we get, particularly in the nonprofit world, we get swamped with the day-to-day. And if there's not accountability, if there's not a goal that that I have clearly in my mind that this is something that I need to achieve. And it's important, not because, oh, I have to do it because the boss said so, but I need to do this because it is part of the mission of my organization. And so I need to keep it top of mind. I think that really helps to keep people on target and keep people accountable for all of these kind of activities. Someone mentioned earlier about sharing the organization's values in the job postings. I think, LaToria, was that you? I think that's an idea that's really got some legs as well, because you know, we talk about, we do a lot of that kind of work at Canopy, right? We do mission, vision, and values, and we do strategic planning and that sort of thing. And we always try to emphasize that this isn't trivial. It's not just that, oh, name 5 values and we'll put it on a poster on the wall and move on. It's like, no, really, what's the personality of your organization? What matters to you? And what are the non-negotiables that, you know, it's always kind of, when the rubber meets the road, are you going to stick with those values? And I think that's one of the keys. How else do you express those values to your existing employees as well as your new hires?
Well, I will jump in for Louis Ginter. Of course, we are at the last half of our strategic planning, and we have a lot of new initiatives. There's a lot of new things that's happening in the garden. One would be, we just hired our director of social responsibility. I think that's a really huge piece that can move us forward. I look forward to collaborating with him from an HR perspective. I also feel that it's very important. I believe in the people. And so we have to be completely transparent. We have to empower our staff, all of the stakeholders, so that all can play a part, you know, in our growth and movement forward.
Yeah, and I think helping people see how they connect to that mission that might seem sort of lofty or esoteric or up there in the clouds, but how does the gardener who's spreading mulch, how does that person understand how she connects to that larger mission? And how does the zookeeper scooping elephant poop understand why that role is a part of the greater mission, right?
And I will add also more regarding the strategic planning. Almost literally all of our staff played a part in this process. And so by all of the staff members playing a part in it, now they feel valued. They feel like they are part of what we're going to do moving forward and have a better understanding of where we're going, that mission and that vision. And so I think that those listening sessions was great, and staff definitely feel like they've had input on our new strategic plan. So I think that that's phenomenal, considering that a lot of these initiatives are very new for the garden. And so I think that alone is a huge step for us. And I definitely look forward to how this rolls out.
Awesome. I just noticed a question in the chat that I really would like to get to. Marilyn is asking if the panelists can briefly touch on exit interviews and how those can be used to retain your remaining staff. It's a great question. Any thoughts?
So I have 2 thoughts on that. The first is, I'm going to twist the question a little bit. We actually did stay interviews when I started. I met with folks from across the organization with a particular focus on folks from underrepresented groups to hear, you know, what they liked in their job, what they didn't like in their job. I always gave them the, if you ruled the world, you know, what would you change question. And that was really interesting and helped me define my priorities for what would work in terms of attraction and retention. And then for exit interviews, I like to do them myself because I think that they are so important. I don't like to farm it out to, you know, just anybody, because I think you really, it's like interviewing a candidate. You you have a set of questions, but then you need to really dig deep and find out and see where the patterns are in your organization.
If I can just piggyback, Lisa, I love your comment about stay interviews. I think those are so important and critical. And I think going back to kind of this whole retention conversation and development, I think as simple as even having the person's manager's manager reach out to them, just check in and see how are they doing and reinforcing the value and contributions that they bring regardless of their role. All of that is really so important to get to. But obviously at the exit, understanding, you know, what drove that is important. But I think the stay interview concept that you just described, I found very great success with.
Yeah, I absolutely love that idea. I've never done that in any of my positions, and boy, I wish I could go back and do that. It's brilliant. And again, it reinforces the values of the organization. It reinforces that you as a person, you matter to this institution, and I want to understand how you feel about your role. Yeah, wonderful idea. In our last 4 minutes, who's got a question or a comment, or do any of the panelists have any closing thoughts?
I was just going to quickly share Misha's comment. I hope that's okay, but her 2 cents on exit interviews, that they should identify bottlenecks and other issues that might not be on your radar. So you can really use them to identify the root causes and then kick off change. She says, challenge your team. My motto has been, why not?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I'm pleased to see the way that cultural organizations seem to be becoming a little bit braver with their staff. Certainly in the era in which I came up, there was a wall between leadership and employees, right? And I'm so happy because what is the big secret? There's not a big secret up there in those lofty levels. So let's let people feel connected to it, and let's do it as they're coming into our organizations. Again, sort of sticking with the topic of this webinar, let's let them know right from the start, you're going to be a part of this. You're not just going to be a poop shoveler or a gardener spreading mulch. Yeah, and I love courageous is one of the values of the Denver Zoo. Yeah, let's use words like that and let's mean it, right? Let's define, and I know Denver has done this, but what does courageous mean for your organization? What does that mean you will do when the protesters come or something? You know, what does that mean you will do when things get hard? And I think that's an important thing for us all to think about. Thank you. I want to thank LaToria and Lisa and Sasha so much for your participation. Again, it's been wonderful to get new voices and new perspectives. Your ideas, I've been taking notes, and I know that we're recording and all of that. Super helpful. And we now have this idea about the generational conversation for next time. So we may be tapping some of your shoulders again as we move forward. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone. Any final thoughts?
Thank you for the opportunity.
Nope, you go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you. And if anybody has any other questions, like, feel free to reach out to me directly. I think somebody was asking about templates for various things. I'm happy to share whatever I have. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you. That's very generous of you.
My final thoughts would be my favorite 3 E's being equitable, exposure, and empowerment. That's what drives our HR strategies here at Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden.
Love it.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. This has been great.
Thank you. It has been great. Thank you.
Awesome.
It's been a pleasure with the panel.
Yes, you've all been wonderful. I wish we could go have coffee together sometime and just shoot the breeze, maybe one of these days, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you all so much. The folks who joined us today, thank you for your attention, for your interest in this topic, for your engagement. And yeah, more to come. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.